Hello and welcome back to Philosophy Dialogues. Today I'm joined by Erik Gross, who works on the Better Arguments project for the Aspen Institute. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be talking to a young person who's excited about civil discourse.
Thank you, yeah. So I guess right off the bat, for my viewers, could you give us an introduction to what the Better Arguments project is all about?
Yeah. So a little background on myself. My name is Erik Gross. I'm a program associate for the Aspen Institute Citizenship and American Identity program. The Aspen Institute is a Washington, D.C. based public policy think tank. The Citizenship and American Identity program is one of its 60-something policy programs where we focus on civic engagement projects and what I like to call culture of democracy projects, which is less about the legal and literal mechanisms that uphold democracy, but the beliefs and cultural norms that make for a healthy and open democratic society. One of our main initiatives is Better Arguments Project. Better Arguments Project is a partnership between our program at Aspen, Facing History and Ourselves, which is an education nonprofit, and Allstate. The Better Arguments Project started as an idea around the time of the 2016 presidential election, when a lot of these divides that our country has been going through were really coming to the fore in a much more prominent way than they had been prior. And our executive director, Erik Gross, made the point in an Atlantic article that the key to addressing division in this country isn't for people to argue less and find middle ground, to meet each other in the middle, agree to disagree, so to speak, but to argue better. That what he was saying was that it's not that we in America right now are arguing too much, it's that we're not doing it with intellectual humility, empathy, understanding, etc. So he put out this call for us to find healthier, more constructive ways to disagree, better arguments. And out of that idea, the Better Arguments Project was born. And over several years, working with advisors, community organizers, educators, and academics, we set out to answer the question, what is a better argument? That is, to give a more concrete answer to people about what that actually looks like. Since a lot of people recognize the need for us to find healthier, more constructive ways to disagree, but often lack a concrete framework for what that really looks like. And over the course of this deep exploration, we developed our framework, which includes 3 dimensions and 5 principles, which I'll give a quick overview on. The 3 dimensions we talk about as really providing the background and context for every argument. And this is history, emotion, and power are the 3 dimensions. And these are both things that exist and inform our disagreements. Our views are often informed by historical narratives, they're informed by our emotions, and they're informed by our perception of power dynamics. And but they are also things that we practice. A better argument should be grounded in history. If you have a viewpoint, you should be looking to back it up with historical facts. If you're engaging with someone else, you should be practicing emotional intelligence in that interaction. And if you're having a better argument, you should be doing whatever you can to create a level playing field to even out the power dynamics so that one person doesn't dominate the discussion. So those are the 3 dimensions. And then the 5 principles are a little bit more tangible steps that people can take and sort of act as conversational norms for a better argument. And those are, number 1, and most important and probably most difficult, take winning off the table. You should be engaging to learn and to express yourself rather than to win or try to defeat your opposition. The second one is prioritize relationships and listen passionately. That means active listening, and I think a more nuanced understanding of that principle is that oftentimes when we are arguing with someone, we think about them in terms of the view that they represent. You know, you have X view and you represent Y group of people. Instead of thinking like that, we should try to have a more relational understanding of them. You are my friend, you are my colleague, you are a person I am in community with. 3 is pay attention to context. No one's view on an issue is formed in a vacuum. It's created by many influences, from lived experiences to the type of information that they have access to. And what that looks like in a bad argument is not having a sort of knee-jerk reaction to what that person's view is. Oh my God, how could you think that? That's crazy to me. It means taking a step back and asking why, and trying to understand the root causes of their viewpoint and what they really mean, rather than having that really initial reaction. The 4th principle is embrace vulnerability. We like to say that vulnerability is necessary in any type of interaction that isn't simply confirming your own worldviews. That you need to be able to open up in a better argument. You need to be able to share your feelings. You need to be able to admit when you don't know things. I think that there's something really vulnerable around admitting your own doubts, admitting your own lack of knowledge on certain areas. And I think that that's a really vulnerable experience for a lot of people. And then 5th is make room to transform. In a better argument,
there a little bit. Could you repeat that 5th one?
Yeah. The 5th principle is make room to transform. In a better argument, we don't necessarily ask people to change their view at the end. We don't ask people to meet in the middle or find a resolution. But we ask people to at least be open to the possibility of change. Because if you're not open to the possibility of change, there's not much point in engaging in the first place. And when we've hosted better arguments, we've asked people about the types of changes that they experience, and that often looks like walking away from the interaction with less assumptions about the other side. It looks like having a more nuanced opinion on the issue. It looks like a particular point made changing their perspective a little bit. And I think that's a really important principle, to be able to sit with the interaction afterwards and reflect. So that's the better arguments framework in a nutshell, which we developed over the course of community events and tested out by bringing people together to have better arguments. And now, after developing this framework, we're working to embed this approach into various aspects of American civic life, which we do through some of our core activities, such as we host webinars and workshops where we teach people about this framework, and we create resources such as our middle school curriculum, which educators across the country use to teach these skills to students, which is just an initiative I'm very excited about, because I like to think about how much better we'd be off if we all had that type of education growing up. Yes. And we run an ambassador program, which is sort of like a fellowship style program for leaders who are concerned about civil discourse in their communities, where we go on this deep immersive learning journey with them and prepare them to make change through their role. And yeah, that's the Better Arguments project at a glance.
Yeah, that's awesome. You guys do awesome work. I've seen some of the things you guys have been doing, and then I've also been familiar with the Better Arguments project for a bit now. It's really cool. I did have a question, like a follow-up. You mentioned like taking winning out of the equation. When you do that, or when people finally learn to not discuss to win an argument, what are some like changes you see that are better?
Yeah, I think it just opens you up to completely new possibilities. Something that I think about a lot with that principle is, maybe this, since you're still in school, maybe you won't totally get this, but I feel like in high school or college, you're in these classes together. You're encouraged to debate with each other. I know that for me in college, I knew that winning the classroom argument wasn't going to affect my grade or anything. So I would just engage just because, I was there and I might as well speak up and engage in the discussion and hopefully learn something from it. And I think when you step away from academic settings, that often doesn't happen a whole lot for a lot of people. And I think, and this is a long-winded way of saying that I think a lot of people lose sight of the fact there is a point to engaging in a debate other than just winning or convincing the other person that you were right, And I think when you let go of that goal, then it can just be about presence. It can just be about being there, listening, articulating your own point of view, exchanging ideas and learning. And when you're trying to win, you are just listening to what the other person's saying with the goal of responding, right? Like a presidential debate where they're on stage and they're trying to win voters. They're not there just to have a conversation and learn together. They're there to hear what the other person has to say and then respond to it and to make the more convincing point. And when you don't have that goal, you can just absorb and be present.
Yeah, I love that advice. Thank you. And I guess,
Can I say one more thing?
Go on.
And then one thing I neglected to mention is that I also think is really important is that I think when you're there without the goal of winning, then having those debates can bring us closer together rather than driving us apart. That if you're there to win, it has that competitive sort of mentality. And what we've seen with bad arguments is that instead of viewing, walking away from that as enemies, if you're there not to win, you can argue with someone and even like them more afterwards. That you've gained an appreciation and respect for who they are, what their worldview is, etc. That isn't always possible if you're there in a more competitive environment.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about, because in philosophy dialogues, when I was doing peer-to-peer discussions, one of the main focuses was to not win anything. It was to just have a productive discussion. And I noticed those discussions, well, they were more productive. They were much more amicable. And we ended up agreeing on a lot more things than I would have expected if there was an idea of winning at the end. So yeah, I love that idea. Now, in your career, I was wondering, could you recount some times where you've successfully gone about dealing with disagreements, and how did you do that?
Yeah. I'm going to give a shout out to a former coworker of mine. I'll make sure to send this to him when this goes out. But at my last job, I worked at a higher education policy nonprofit that was generally conservative leaning, and I was there as one of the token liberals in the office. Okay. And I had a really deep friendship with one colleague. His name was Jonathan Bedluzny. He's the vice president of academic affairs over there, and he's a former college professor, one of the smartest people I've ever had the pleasure of working with, and pretty conservative. And I would go into his office like every day before I'd start my work. I'd have my coffee with him. We talk about news. We talk about politics. We never saw eye to eye on anything. We had a lot of fun just chatting, and every day with him was having a better argument. And I think that if more people had those types of relationships in their lives, that felt positive rather than negative, that I definitely believe we would be less polarized right
Hmm. And how did you ensure that you could have those positive discussions even though you had such different worldviews?
now. Well, I think he made it easy. I
Hmm.
think that from his teaching experience, he knew how to do that type of stuff. And there's definitely something to be said for learning these skills just in life. But I think that I'd refrain from judgment. I think that I would try to ask follow-up questions and learn more. Um, and sometimes sometimes I wouldn't respond on the spot. I think it'd be helpful. Um, in a relationship like that, we would if he said something that I disagreed with, sometimes I would sit with it for a while and then maybe the next day revisit it. And I think sometimes giving yourself like processing time and things like that can help a lot.
Yeah. One of the things I was wondering about was if arguments start to get out of control, would that be a good method to use? Like just say, okay, I'm just going to sit with what this other person has said, and then I'll maybe come back later when we're both more calm about it. And then that's
Yeah,
what we can discuss.
yeah, and I think that's a sound strategy, and I think that another thing you can do is if you want if you don't want to just like take a time out and walk away or something. Um, if you're bringing people together to exchange ideas, maybe you encourage people to sit there for a moment and reflect before going forward. You take a a quick break, you let people digest, and then you move forward. And I think that can also be a good solution. And like if with philosophy dialogues and anything else that you end up doing in life where you're bringing people together to disagree, building in any avenues for reflection, I think, helps a lot.
Yeah, that's really good advice. So I guess that helps with a lot of things, right? So it's like out of control arguments. If you ever find yourself getting upset too, that acts as a buffer. Yeah, no, that's really good advice to take. Um,
And I also just like to note that like one thing I've really learned in this work and engaging with other people is that um, those types of coping mechanisms and things look different for different types of people. There's not like that much prescriptive stuff. There are tips out there. There are resources on this. We actually, I neglect to mention, we produce a lot of resources that we call our methods, which sort of hone in on um, particular aspects of the Better Arguments framework. And these are like interactive workbooks that help people uh, practice the habits of mind and cognitive tricks to master the individual aspects of the Better Arguments framework. And we have a lot of uh, sort of psychology-based resources that people can use. But I think that often the right approach can be very different for very different types of people.
and so say you're like in the middle of a discussion and either you're, I don't know, you're so into it you don't want to take a break, or there's no opportunity to take a break. Is there any tips from those resources that you can remember right now for people in that situation to have a better argument?
I'm not sure if I have a really particular one, but I know that people I've talked to who specialize in facilitation, um, sort of what they call it is bringing the temperature down in the room. And But I know that there are mechanisms out there to help sort of cool down groups of people in those types of situations. But it's not my particular area of expertise in that.
Okay, cool. Yeah. And I can, if anyone's interested, I can link some of those resources down below. So if you want to check those out from the Better Arguments Project, you can find those in the description. So I guess my next question is, how do you apply some of the skills you've seen in debate and arguments to your own life?
Definitely think I've gotten better at it since I've been working on the Better Arguments project. I'm happy to say that. And maybe also the part of that is just like growing up a little bit. But I mean, just to share personally, I think I've always been someone who believes in what Better Arguments is about, but I can't say I've always actually been great at it in practice. And I personally, I have ADHD, and I think sometimes like having that presence to be calm or to I don't know, not get over exuberant and to spitball some random points and things like that, I think is definitely something I've had to learn over time. And I think I'm getting better at it with age, I'm happy to say. It's always good to see yourself growing up a little bit. But I definitely make, just for like things I do in my personal life, I think I definitely try to like read and listen to podcasts that I know are going to challenge my thinking a little bit. One thing I'm very conscious of, and this is just a personal thing, well, when I'm on Twitter, I try to have as balanced of viewpoints as I can, in terms of the sense that I make sure to follow some liberals who I disagree with, who maybe are too far left for me, and I make sure to follow some conservatives who are too far right for me, and some people, you know, more in the middle that I am more inclined to agree with. But I try to create that type of spectrum in my life to hear different viewpoints and practice engaging with them and thinking them through. And then just another thing is that I think I tried to be friends with people, I think, who don't necessarily agree with me on everything, but who share an appreciation for better arguments. And I'm sure they aren't thinking about it in the term better arguments, but you know what I mean? Like that
Yeah.
I try to be friends with people who enjoy having discussions and who have an appreciation for the need to be open-minded and empathetic and whatnot when engaging with someone else.
Yeah, and you mentioned something that like as you grew older, you grew a lot better at doing arguments. I think we all have. Well, most of us. Hopefully
Some
most of
people
us.
maybe not, but
Well, maybe not, but yeah. But
I think for me, yeah, maybe it's not the case. I don't know if it's the case for most people or not that they get better or worse. For me, I think it is just about like impulse control and things like
Mhm.
that.
And one of my personal theories is a lot of that has to do like impulse control and a few other things has to do with how you were raised, like the family dynamics you had around arguments. So I guess for you personally, how were debates and disagreements treated in your family when you were growing up? And were they encouraged or discouraged? Were they seen as good or bad? Like what was going on
Yeah,
there?
I mean, my family loves to debate, but unfortunately, there's not that much intellectual diversity in my family. I think we generally agree on the broad strokes. But I doubt definitely no fault of my parents. We definitely had a culture in my family where we liked to debate and discuss stuff. But I think that my family isn't as politically or intellectually diverse as other people's families. I think that we agree on a lot of the broad strokes. So I don't know if I was challenged in the same way that some of my friends or other people I know who have a much wider gulf of viewpoints between themselves or their parents or their extended family, you know, um, which I try to be conscious of. I think I definitely have. I think it's at times has been easy for me to talk the talk about how important um, it is to engage with other viewpoints. But with some of my friends who, you know, really struggle with political divides in their family and stuff like that, I really, really empathize because I know it can be very difficult. But that was just not my personal experience.
Yeah. I mean, I know for me personally, my family is into discussion and debate, but they are very fact-based and then argument-based. So they'll really be poke and prod at your arguments. And personally, politically, I'm more progressive than my parents. So as a result, I'm super focused on optics and also the strength of arguments. So it's always interesting when I come at it from, or when I discuss with other people who probably had different family dynamics, just how different discussion and debate works, which is why I asked that question.
Yeah, yeah. Well, my family's all emotion, or at least most of us are. But then it's funny. Uh, I think my dad is probably the most forward with his opinions, and then my mom, she's not necessarily not for like that guarded with her opinions, but she used to be a journalist, and she always tries to approach things in like the most neutral manner when we're talking about stuff. But eventually, her true colors end up showing, and that's how it works in the end of the day.
So yeah, like what are some times like you weren't successful with arguing with your parents or in general? And what did you feel you did wrong in those situations, and what did you learn from that?
I don't know if I have like a specific anecdote to point to, but um, I think that what's been my Achilles heel in trying to have arguments at times has been wanting to wanting to be the smartest one there, or wanting to have some like snappy one liner, and just focus, both, which I think defeated the quality of discussions I had, both because I'd be throwing a wrench into the conversation with whatever my snappy one liner would be, but also because I would just lose my train of thought trying to think of my what my line was going to be, or what witty response I was going to have, rather than just being there and listening and processing. And that's part of why I mentioned what I said earlier about how so much of a better argument is being there, listening to understand rather than listening to reply. And I think for me personally, listening to reply has been my downfall at times.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I can definitely relate to some of that. So I guess just like my final question, a wrap up is, what are some tips that you have for young people who want to go about respectful disagreements? Like I know you've had some already, like
Yeah.
take breaks, don't look to reply, don't look to win, but like in a more general sense, like what are some you have?
Well, Dylan, when I saw that you sent me the questions before this call, I was thrilled that you're thinking about that. I was thinking about it over the course of the last day about what type of tips. Um, when you're in college, I'm just going to give my like little bits of wisdom, my little truisms. But when you're in college, try to sign up for classes that seem outside of your comfort zone in some way or another. And where maybe you're in, maybe you'll be inclined to disagree with either the professor or the other students. So in college, I definitely took classes where I ended up being the most liberal person in the class, and I definitely took classes where I ended up being the most conservative person in the class. And by doing both, you learn a lot, you know. So I would say like find ways to push your comfort zone in sort of both directions is one way. And another one is try to make friends who are intellectually curious, who like to discuss stuff, um, who yeah will sort of bring you into that environment. Another one is, so I mentioned signing up for classes. I think sign up for classes that'll push your comfort zone. I think that professors are great for teaching you and pushing you intellectually, but also don't like wait on someone else to do it for you, you know? Like find ways that make you feel things and ways to be intellectually stimulated outside of just pure academic environment. You know, join a club, start your own club where you get together and talk about things. Stuff like that, I think is great. And yeah, I think those are a couple bits of advice I'd have for young people who are passionate about respectful disagreement.
Thank you. Yeah. So like one of them I noticed that was really interesting to me was instead of just waiting for someone, like for me with my parents who would poke and prod my arguments, start doing that yourself, right?
Yeah, because I think sometimes we in life, this is so much bigger than just this, but we wait for someone else to create that environment. Oh, and then another one, I just, I know, I feel like social activism now is often sort of one of the main pathways for civic engagement for so many young people. And I feel like getting involved in some activism stuff, whether groups or demonstrations or whatever, I feel like can be such a powerful way to go about having respectful disagreements. I think that you can definitely meet people that way and engage that way that would really broaden your horizons. That's my other piece of advice that I forgot to mention.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. No, I say it's awesome because I've done that and it has worked out for me as well. So
Yeah.
yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate all your advice and your thoughts. It was amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And also resources for both the Aspen Institute and also for the Better Arguments program will be in the description. So yeah, I think that's it.
Dylan, thank you so much. I love what you're doing here with the channel. I love the interest in respectful disagreement, and I'm more than happy to talk about this stuff at length whenever. And it was a pleasure being here talking to you.
It was a pleasure talking to you as well. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, and have a good one, everyone. Bye.
Bye.